United States. But this is the beginning. He's got their attention. All the George Soros astroturf is out there on the streets. I think it's great. It's a good start.
Danny, was this decision rushed? Is this something that's going to keep us safe, or are we seeing a lot of confusion surrounding it?
This runs contrary to everything that Americans believe in, as evidenced by the millions of people who have come into the streets this past 9 days since Trump's inauguration to say no to the Trump agenda. We should really salute the millions of protesters, some who are coming to their first protest ever, others who've been in the streets now for decades for saying no to the Trump agenda, an agenda that's extremely divisive, based on scapegoating and stereotyping the victims of U.S. foreign policy. Why is the situation in Syria so dire? What role has the U.S. played there? Iraq, Libya. So these 7 countries that have been targeted for this ban are the very countries most affected by U.S. bombing, U.S. occupation, and U.S. recolonization. This is going to have a polarizing effect on all of humanity, and specifically across the United States.
Well, you know, there's an element of truth to what Danny says, but the irony is, if you look at the neocons, the advocates of all this destructive activity in these countries, they're the first ones to squeal, Islamophobia, this is un-American, we can't do this. Donald Trump is saying enough of this, invade the world, invite the world. We're going to keep people who are a danger to us out of our country, but we're not going to go over and engage in regime change and these hostile activities against other countries. We're going to look out for our own safety and not try to meddle in other people's affairs. And I'd like to know, is Mr. Shah, was he out there complaining about the blatant discrimination against Christian refugees from Syria that the Obama administration practiced?
Danny, I'll let you respond.
Well, the hallmark of U.S. foreign policy, whether it was under George Bush or Clinton or Obama or now Trump, has been to invade and bomb other countries. So I don't think that's going to stop under Trump.
I think it will stop, and he has said no more telling other people.
But we'll see with time.
Well, that's the thing about this, what he's doing now, what he did about TPP in Mexico and so forth. He is following through on his rhetoric. He is not acting like a typical politician.
But let me ask you both this. Is he following through using the intelligence he's been given and using the resources from each department to know whether these are the right moves? These are statements that he made on the campaign trail. We also know on the campaign trail that he talked about a Muslim ban. I mean, is this just a way of putting that through without actually saying, yes, we're banning Muslims, but just making a blanket ban on these countries?
Well,
he's also ratcheting.
Go ahead,
Jim.
No, it's not a blanket.
He's ratcheting.
Go ahead.
He's ratcheting up threats against Iran, against China. There could be some type of Russia-U.S. alliance against China. So it's not that the world is in any way safer with Trump. In terms of this rhetoric of the persecuted Christians, when has the U.S. ever cared about persecuted minorities unless it's in their interest? So they cry crocodile tears that they're afraid for this or that minority to then justify the reinvasion or recolonization of these countries.
Well, frankly, I don't think that we've heard much crocodile tears about Christians, certainly, but I hope Mr. Trump will do something about it, starting with stopping the supporting these various terrorist groups in Syria and other places, and working with the Russians and the Syrian government to destroy these terrorist groups instead of supporting them. And those are exactly the kind of groups, the same ideology, we need to screen for and make sure those people don't get into the United States.
Okay, well, let's talk about these 7 countries that right now apply to this 90-day ban. Jim mentioned it earlier. They don't have a lot of terrorist activity here in the United States. I mean, why not Saudi Arabia? Why not Afghanistan or Pakistan, where we've actually seen some activity happening here in the United States? I mean, San Bernardino, that was Pakistani, a woman from Pakistan, a man that was a U.S. citizen, but also of Pakistani descent.
Exactly,
so where do you reconcile having these 7 countries and not others like Saudi Arabia?
I would say, look, turning the policy of the U.S. government is a big dumb dinosaur. And that's the way it is bureaucratically. You have to start somewhere. There's an order out based on a statute from the Obama administration. You start with that, and then you refine it. Maybe you change the countries, or as I say, you shift over to the criteria that focus more on the specific individuals, because this is a pathology that exists in the Islamic, and frankly, only in the Sunni community, doesn't exist elsewhere, not with Buddhists, not even with Shiites. Frankly, who do you have to screen more carefully? A Christian coming from Iraq or Egypt, or a Muslim coming from London or Paris? It seems to me, given what happens in Europe from people who are residing in those countries, that's more where you need to look for people who are disposed toward this kind of terrorist activity.
Danny?
But these jihadist tendencies that Jim mentions have been supported by the U.S. when it was in their interest now for decades and decades. Look
That's
at
right.
the Mujahideen
It's got to stop.
in
It's got to stop.
Afghanistan.
You're right. I agree.
Well, I doubt it. I doubt it's going to stop. The U.S. is going to support their local proxies wherever they can, and that's why Saudi Arabia was not on this list. So we see so many contradictions in this policy, and what we're seeing now as a result of major fissures in the U.S. foreign policy establishment, in the State Department. They're circulating a memorandum now against Trump's policy. So really the ruling class in the United States is more disunited than ever. And it's reflecting the weakness of this administration that's thrown everything within 9 days of taking power into a constitutional crisis.
Well, and I think that's a great thing. He's only been in power for less than 2 weeks, and he's got everybody in an uproar. We know he's serious about this stuff. And Danny, if you can agree with me that we should put Saudi Arabia on this list and say no to all their money and influence peddling in this town, could we agree on that, that's one of the real epicenters of terrorist inspiration and funding that needs to be singled out?
We can put the 20,000 princes and the royal class of Saudi Arabia on that list, but I would not put the everyday working people of Saudi Arabia, a country that's composed mainly of immigrants from Bangladesh and the Philippines.
They should be scrutinized.
Well, I'm not for any lists. I mean, lists are used by fascists and Nazis. Put the U.S. government on a list, the greatest purveyor of violence in the history of the world. That's who should be on a list.
Extreme vetting. That's